Hi, I'm Devin Zeidel with Scheer Partners. Today, we're at City Garage Science and Technology Center in the Baltimore Peninsula, where I'm going to meet with Chris Frew, founder of BioBuzz and CEO of Workforce Genetics. So Chris, thanks for joining us today for our episode of BioBlast. It's been a long week, it sounds like, and obviously making time for us, and we appreciate that.
Great. Well, I appreciate you having me today for this conversation. Topics I definitely I'm happy to talk about and have a lot to say about. So I hope we have enough time.
Yeah, me too. Obviously, you have a lot of experience in the biotech and life science sector, both with Workforce Genetics and with BioBuzz. And in particular, you've seen a lot of trends and sort of the evolution of the industry. And so, I think where you started was recognizing that there was a paradigm shift and skills gap in terms of the hiring, talent, and recruitment realm. And so, I'd be interested to hear more about where you saw sort of those gaps, maybe when you started 10 or 15 years ago, and how they've evolved to where we are today.
Yeah, so I've been in the life science space for about 20 years, and I've been fortunate. I've seen a lot of trends, and I've also been, in the life science space not as a scientist, so always on the business side. So, and the market now is like so dynamic, and I think a lot of people just kind of coming into it are really feeling a lot of how fast the market's moving. But my career has been built around talent, the talent side of life sciences. So, and the talent's a bellwether for what's happening with the greater market. And we started Workforce Genetics really because what we saw was on the talent landscape, there was a shift happening where it was no longer this reactive process of hiring. Companies were becoming very much more engaged in this proactive approach. Talent acquisition was becoming more like a traditional sales and marketing funnel than it was what you might have thought of a recruiter 20 years ago, just posting jobs on a job board and screening candidates or looking at paper resumes. There was this whole, again, almost like a marketing funnel that was approached. So I loved that. I'm a marketing guy too. So when I started Workforce Genetics, I was just coming out of a SaaS company that I was at for a few years, a startup. And I looked at, BioBuzz, which I've been running for, 10 years at the time. And I was like, there's this great opportunity to combine media and marketing with talent acquisition. And to be honest, I didn't have too much of a business plan. I just had an idea. So 6 years later today, again, we've learned a ton. Workforce Genetics is a professional services firm. We've actually separated the two businesses, and Workforce Genetics focuses on life science search and outsourced talent acquisition for growth stage companies like startups and other growth stage biotech companies. Whereas BioBuzz focuses on building community, especially career community now, and helping to connect job seekers to employers. So we kind of separated those two, but we're still fully vetted in how marketing and talent acquisition are kind of work together.
Yeah, that's a tremendous overview, and obviously a lot of success helping build the ecosystem, not only here in Maryland locally, but obviously exposure to Philadelphia, exposure to the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. And so you talk a little bit about, obviously the access to talent, building community, and obviously we hear a lot about that from, government, public institutions, universities, industry as well. But when you think about building community today, in particular as you think about, let's say Pharma 4.0, and I don't think I've coined this or necessarily created this, but stealing, this idea of Workforce 4.0, how does that evolution into today's requirements for companies as they look to commercialize new and novel technologies? What is the definition of community as you see it today?
That's great. I think we could probably unpack that into a 40-minute conversation in itself. So let me take a stab at a couple things. One, as you know, since Scheer Partners is so integral into like the foundation of a lot of these communities with the real estate you all support, hubs are so important in life sciences because a lot of people are tied to labs, and community is such an important part. And in fact, for innovation ecosystems, I'm a big proponent that community is one of those undervalued elements to supporting really sustaining innovation ecosystems. And when you think about Pharma 4.0 or Workforce 4.0, these trends that are taking place that we all have to now adopt, and your tenants and my clients are all trying to figure out right now, is the trends like, the virtual work element. More and more we're seeing executives, distributed executive teams, and that's okay, and it's working. Even R&D leaders are not always at the lab, so that's a big element that's happening. You're also seeing the rise of sub-markets because of improved workforce development pipelines and because of other technology improvements. I think sub-markets, and because of the virtual element as well, are able to actually build sustainable ecosystems in itself. And I think that the other element to community that we're seeing is that, and we see this at BioBuzz a lot, is the messaging is important. Every ecosystem is trying to attract the best talent and the best companies to support the ecosystem. So, we're seeing a lot of these markets really investing in getting their message clear and their brand clear. So that, because they're all different, right? Philadelphia, as you mentioned, is different than Maryland. And in Maryland, you have Frederick, which has a different value proposition than Baltimore, right? Than Montgomery County. So what I'm seeing is these sub-markets are really kind of defining and understanding where in the life science kind of continuum they support. And by owning that, again, that's a big part of how they're sustaining their growth. Like Frederick has a tremendous biomanufacturing footprint, right? Great cost of living, and they're not out there saying this is the best place for startups. And there's a lot of great startups out there. Two of the companies that got funded over the past 6 months in Maryland are based in Frederick. And again, Baltimore, on the other hand, has this pipeline coming out of Hopkins in Maryland, which defines what it is. In Philadelphia, again, Carl June's lab and Spark Therapeutics has this really rich cell therapy business, complemented by a surrounding large pharma business. So all those things really kind of build your unique kind of DNA as a cluster. And I think a lot of these markets are starting to really understand where they fit and market to that. So as companies are looking for where to move their operation, I think it's becoming very clear, and it's workforce, real estate, right? Real estate, and not just your traditional real estate, but what flexible amenities and what opportunities there are for a company to start and scale. These are all things that ecosystems are messaging more so than ever before.
You hear also a lot about how do we get people back to the office, and again, that's particular to more of the professional services maybe and some of the tech industries. But when you think about biotech or cell and gene therapy or developing a small molecule, it's not just coming into the lab, put on the white coat, doing your work at the bench and leaving for the day. Talent these days seem to want more. And so what's needed in the office? Is it a gym? Is it childcare? Is it cold brew on tap? What are you hearing and seeing for companies that are looking to get really, good talent?
Yeah, great question. I think in general, flexibility is one of the things that I think employers are having to adopt.
Yeah.
And also I think employers are getting their employer value proposition very clear. We're working with a company right now, and their CHRO was one of the first 5 hires.
Right.
And that was important to them as a startup because they wanted to make sure that culture and clarity around their value proposition and the mission was baked into the very early days of the company, because they know how important that is to scale. So when you think about attracting top talent, and you hit on a lot of the key things, like how do we get talent into the office? Right. And of course, if you're doing lab work, you kind of have to, can't PCR, you can't pipette in the living room.
Be nice though.
Yeah, it would. But so I think flexibility. So we're seeing flex schedules. You want to flex in, and because a lot of people, especially after the pandemic, it feels like there's a lot more childcare and just different personal things that kind of are impacting work. No longer is like hey, you work between 9 and 5 and everything else you have to do around it.
Right.
So flexibility is key. I think community is another important part. Not only community in terms of your workforce and like understanding your workforce as a community and fostering that, but also like around you. Like here at City Garage, this is great. I mean, we love it here because we're surrounded by med tech and life science companies who are at the forefront of innovation. But I can't tell you how many times I'm getting coffee and there's 3 other companies that are part of this facility, your tenants here, that are chatting at the bar, at the coffee bar.
Right.
And I know firsthand, because we've talked about it, how nice of an environment it is. And it's nice when you can go to work and you're not just around the 5 or 10 or 15 people in your company, right. Especially because early stage companies, that's kind of what you have. But you have this extended community. And I think that, we hear that here, so I know that plays a role. So I do think when employers are and companies are looking for where they're going to locate, it's not just about, just the brick and mortar and, the bones of the facility, but it's the amenities around it. Right. And is it in a good location as well? So, are there amenities around it that people my staff can walk to? Can they take the train in or bus in? Is it transportation easy? Again, not to keep plugging City Garage, but one of the things I love about this is right on the edge of Baltimore. So you can come to City Garage very easily. And then if you have a meeting at the Biopark, you can be there in a $10 Uber ride, right. Or you can be 15, 20 minutes at Hopkins. But the convenience of getting to Baltimore Peninsula is just unbeatable.
Yeah, I totally agree. I drive in, once in a while to Baltimore coming from Washington, D.C., which, is pretty unpredictable any given day. But arguably coming to the peninsula versus trying to go into the city and around, the inner harbor, it's a very significant difference in terms of timing, commute, general frustration when driving.
Absolutely.
And you talk about that from a perspective too earlier about, companies now are looking to embed a culture, align mission and goal with what they believe in, obviously in complement to some of the technologies that they're looking to address, health disparities or, support, folks in the clinic. But I think it was interesting to say that, one of the companies you're working with hired their CHRO very early in the process. And so you're working a lot with growth companies, obviously the likes of Arcellx and Kite Pharma, among others. And so, getting from milestone to milestone requires different skill sets. And we talked a little about this earlier, but this idea of outsourcing, this idea of fractional employers, and you're doing a lot around that, both from a research perspective in terms of upskilling, but then also how do we support companies in all phases of growth through some fractional hiring. And so, that's really interesting to me, and I think to a lot of our viewers, just in terms of how you are aligning talent with milestones or benchmarks for companies. And it seems to be something that you believe in, not to put words in your mouth, will become more of the norm, maybe rather than the aberration.
Yeah. I think it will become more the norm, and I think if you just look at other trends, there's 63 million freelancers now in the United States. It's about a third of the workforce. That was not even nearly the case pre-pandemic. Now, I think life sciences maybe has not seen as much of the impact in the past historically, but as you mentioned about 2023, we like to say 2023 was a buzzkill. And 2024, I think we're seeing the ramifications of that, right? So you're seeing, and we saw a lot of this come out of JP Morgan, investors are signaling to their portfolio companies and to anyone they're investing in, you need to hit milestones, and we don't expect you to hire heavy to do so. Right. We expect you to keep a conservative core team and show how you're going to hit milestones. So the whole reason why freelancers are really growing as a workforce trend is because it enables companies to adapt to the rapidly changing technologies that are out there. It enables them to focus on milestones without having to make huge commitments to salaries and benefits and things like that. So what we're seeing in the life science space is the same adoption. Yep. Because of 2023 and because of the capital markets and because of this increased pressure to from the investment side, executives are now saying, well, let's look at what everyone else has been doing and see how we adopt it. So that's the whole impotence actually behind why BioBuzz has really made this shift into building what we call the Talent Lab, which is an on-demand talent marketplace for life sciences. So we're building and we're harnessing all the freelancers and all the consultants that are so critical to companies' success, and we've built a platform where employers can now search for the talent they need, the specialized, highly specialized talent they need, and hire them on demand. And I think again, in 20 years I've seen the market shift a lot, and we started this project over a year ago when we started seeing this shift happen. That an increased reliance on contingent workforce and staffing. We're seeing quiet hiring now, which is the 10,000 layoffs that happen. Yeah. Companies are hiring part of those people back as consultants and contractors. So we really started this project and this new pivot for BioBuzz to become the destination for life science careers from the moment that you learn about a career in life sciences till after you retire and you want to just escape your husband for 10 hours a week. Yeah. As a platform where employers could engage that flexible workforce. And we're seeing a lot of really good feedback in the market already. In fact, one of our investors had a project where he called us and said, hey, I need to put together a package for my investment board. I need an AI ML engineer, but I just need them for like 20 hours to validate what we're trying to do and write up and build confidence for our investors that this is the right track. I need a regulatory person who knows cancer diagnostics, and I need a clinical protocol specialist to help write the protocols. Right. But I don't need any of them on permanent. I just need them at a variety of different hours. Yeah. And I said, perfect. That's exactly why we built the Talent Lab. Yeah. And we got them 2 of those people in 24 hours that were already in our system. So, but I think that's a good example, of how flexible talent can help. The other, I think, example that I like to highlight, to your point, is flexible talent and access to talent also enables startups to thrive across any ecosystem. So if we take Baltimore, for instance, I'd consider Baltimore a tier 2 or 3 market. I mean, it's not robust like Philadelphia or Boston or San Francisco. So what would it do for a startup in Baltimore if suddenly you could access a interim chief business officer who's taken 3 products to market out of San Francisco? Right. Or you could find that one specialized antibody specialist or virologist that you needed that came out of wherever they are. So it enables the startup ecosystem in Baltimore to actually thrive because we're not limited by geography and the talent in our geography anymore. Right. So that's the other thing that I'm really excited about. And I think, again, it plays on the trends that we've talked about, that distributed executive teams is accepted. It's the norm. Right. Investors not even being local, that's the norm. Fractionalized talent to hit milestones is becoming the norm. So these are all the market trends that at BioBuzz we've been trying to really respond to. And that is really what we're building the Talent Lab around, is responding to those market conditions so that we can still serve our community. I mean, at the end of the day, that's always been BioBuzz's goal, is to serve our community, to build a more connected workforce. That's been our kind of tagline since 15 years ago, to build a more connected workforce.
Yeah, you did a great job at it as well, I have to say. So Chris, you wrote a really, I think, strong article in BioBuzz in early February about cost-cutting measures that companies are taking, just given sort of the macro environment, some of the uncertainties and some of the risks related to investing in biotech. Obviously, it's a much longer horizon, and there's several hurdles that you have to overcome. And so, having access to capital, having access to resources in terms of facilities, Obviously, the talent conversation is important. And you really did, I think, a strong job of saying, hey, these are sort of the 7 or 8 strategies. And we touched on a few of those with flexibility in the workplace, access to kind of secondhand equipment, and getting that at sort of a discount to market. And obviously some of the outsourcing and fractional investments into specific staffing resources. But what's interesting to me is you sort of brought a term to my attention that I had not seen before, which was kind of hyper local outsourcing, but then sort of, I think, more broadly, how that impacts the trajectory of businesses as they're looking towards commercialization. And in particular, as you think about some of the ecosystems like Philadelphia that have celebrity scientists, and then you look at Johns Hopkins, which equally has celebrity status, but maybe you're not seeing as many repeat entrepreneurs in that capacity. And so what I'm curious to know about is, we're sitting here in Baltimore in the peninsula. Obviously, there's been an announcement about Baltimore as a tech hub. There's been an announcement about Blackbird Ventures coming here to stand up a much more robust sort of ecosystem in terms of keeping technologies here. And so, a large mouthful about that. But, coming back to sort of the strategies and how that impacts those different kind of iterations of Baltimore, kind of coming back to where we are today, be curious to get your thoughts just sort of in reactionary fashion to some of those points that I've just sort of brought up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we wrote that article because we just kept seeing these trends from our clients. And I'd go talk to them and I'd say, well, what are you doing this year? And these trends started coming out, right? About how they're responding to this kind of new environment, new capital markets, new expectations. And we can tie all that back to Baltimore. And like BioBuzz was one of the consortium members for the Tech Hub grant that was submitted just this week. So we're very proud of that and the group that came together. So that's a good example of one of those points that I made, which was an increase in collaboration and partnerships. So nothing happens in life sciences. Things don't get commercialized without good partnerships. And I think that Tech Hub initiative led by GBC was a great example of how the region's coming together to partner and to address some of the other things that were discussed in that article. The investment landscape, different creative ways of investing are important, but also and you mentioned Blackbird Labs. I think from an ecosystem standpoint, Philadelphia has kind of celebrity status, Carl June, and a lot of self-therapy and Spark Therapeutics. What's great about Philadelphia is a lot of those companies, a lot of those entrepreneurs stay there for their second and third investments, or the technology that comes out of June's lab stays in Philadelphia. And what I'm really excited and bullish around what Blackbird's strategy is to keep more of the tremendous medical innovation that comes out of Hopkins or University of Maryland, keep it in Baltimore and keep those companies growing in Baltimore. Yeah. So I think so if they can provide that tech transfer and that stability and that, the ability for some of these repeat entrepreneurs to find success in Baltimore, that does a tremendous amount. Now, what those companies will do to find success are some of those strategies we talked about.
Right.
Hyper virtual outsourcing is one of them. And we have a partner, Kymanox.
Absolutely.
And they've done a tremendous job, and they've really proven this model out where they're a professional services firm and they've worked with companies the size of 1 to 5 people of core teams, kind of like we talked about before. Investors want you to keep your core team, and they're able to come in and help outsource each milestone of the project and provide clear definition of process, expectations, maintain quality, maintain data. So that's an example of how the business of biotech startups is evolving. And we're seeing smaller startups without having to raise as large capital can now hit those next milestones for their investors and to move forward through like this hyper virtual outsourcing model. And again, an expert like Kymanox understands the regulatory elements. So that's part of the equation early on, so you're not making as many mistakes.
Right.
So the same thing is happening with lab build-outs, and I'm sure you're seeing this in, from real estate departments, understanding the full scope of work and working backwards. Yeah. And so like an integrated approach, like there's a company in Philadelphia called Protex, and they have this integrated approach where they work backwards, and we talked about them in the article. And it's saving companies a tremendous amount of time and investment and cost in their build-outs in their cycle. And then in general, again, outsourcing in general, like we said, we're seeing the CDMO business grow this year. We're seeing outsourced CRO and contract research grow because, again, it comes down to those cost-cutting strategies and those milestone-based strategies that companies need to achieve. And again, that's just kind of like the new normal that we're seeing is these companies are now utilizing all these smarter business practices, and more strategic business practices, to again hit those milestones and then grow. And we're fortunate, like again, Baltimore is growing as a market where we have now the resources at each of those stages of the growth that we can support that next phase, which is an exciting place to be.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And a lot of markets too, and you talk about the tier one kind of core markets like Boston, San Francisco, Southern California being ones that you are thinking about as being highly relevant, a lot of venture activity. But we talked a little bit about this before, just in terms of some of these emerging submarkets and ecosystems, and how you don't have to have the capital source present. And I think a lot of times, if you have a good technology, if you have something that a product you're developing that consumers will want, which I think is important too, because a lot of times you might have a really good novel technology, but the application might be limited in use. It can't be, distributed to a large healthcare center or a hospital. Obviously, there's a variety of clinical hurdles that you have to overcome with that. And in particular, I think it's important to also note that, you're building a team along the way, but at a certain point, it's not just the science, it's sales, it's marketing, it's legal, it's regulatory. And so having the outsourcing capabilities, despite some of the premiums that they command, still gives you that flexibility to really maintain your balance sheet in a way that gets you to that next milestone. And I think in particular, Workforce Genetics has done a really good job of understanding the needs and the adaptability of business. Because, with a lot of the integration of machine learning, AI, it's not necessarily just those traditional or historic type of roles that companies are looking for. It's how do we bring in this sort of bioconvergence that's occurring between big tech and life science, which is really what I think is going to propel innovation for the future, and why we're seeing such a large sort of trajectory, or rather a large level of efficiency between maybe what was occurring in like the 70s and 80s, and then what we're looking towards in 2030 and beyond. And so what's really important to take notice of there is how you're thinking about the next iteration of community and sort of the next iteration of science and technology. And so from your perspective, I'm curious to know if you could, sort of design what a utopian type of environment would be conducive to the future. What does that look like, feel like to you, just given your experience and where you sit interacting with companies on a daily basis?
Yeah, so I don't know if I could build a utopian community, but I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah.
Well, one, because of this bioconvergence, I think that it's no wonder that the Baltimore's Tech Hub grant was built around biotech and AI.
Yeah.
You can't ignore the convergence of quantum computing, AI, big data, however you want to cut it up, neural networks into biology. And the companies today, the convergence is happening real time. And again, a lot of them are outsourcing that right now because it's novel insights. They need the experts to come in and tell them how it's done. And then you have really good companies like Bullfrog AI, which is a Maryland-based company, and their AI model is impacting drug discovery. and clinical research, and then Gain Therapeutics, of course, out of Bethesda, using machine learning for target discovery. But like, think about this in the future. Like, if you can reduce the cost of target identification down by 80%, well, you have a lot less research staff, but you might have more engineers and machine learning on staff. So the dynamic of the company changes. From a utopian community, to get back to your question, let me tell you what I think makes community successful. We'll start with that.
Yeah.
You need a pipeline of technology. And I think Baltimore, we have that, right? We have University of Maryland and Johns Hopkins. Hopkins has the most NIH funding out of any university. So we have a technology pipeline of IP. You need the talent. And we have got great talent. We've got great research talent. Commercialization is something we haven't had as much of here, and that's why we often see a lot of companies leave. Yeah. However, because of this distributed leadership model that we have, our startups today can access that talent. And at Workforce Genetics, we're helping companies. We're recruiting chief business officers and CFOs and CEOs from other markets to just helicopter in a couple days a week if needed, or a couple times a month. So we're seeing that impact. So I think the talent is not an issue anymore. So we'll check that off. So we got a talent pipeline, a technology pipeline. The other thing is real estate. People need a place to be. Well, places like City Garage. I know 4MLK is coming up. Fast Forward, has shown they can commercialize and provide that space. But the real estate's so important to that utopian community, and I do think, coming back to it, a place where your startups can bump into each other and share ideas. And the investment is the other piece of it, And I think that the ecosystems that have figured that out. And in Maryland, we have TEDCO, which has been such an important part of our innovation ecosystem, from commercializing technology out of the universities to their seed funding and their growth funding. But now we have, Blackbird Labs coming in, and we have Ekphora Capital here based out of City Garage, and we've got a lot of other capital resources that are starting to emerge. So I'd say those are the four main horsemen of a utopian innovation community. Yeah. And then I want to make another plug for community, because I think that's important, that kind of is a thread that weaves in between of everything. Without a community where your successful founders, your successful commercial leaders are reinvesting back into the community, without that repeat entrepreneur, or that successful exit, and that person, they don't have to start another company, but they can reinvest and in an angel fund or be part of it. And I see that when I go to Philadelphia a lot. And I think Blackbird Laboratories and Blackbird Ventures, I think that is hopefully the start of that here in Baltimore, is really codifying that. But community is an important part of that utopian community. I mean, you got to also want to be here, right? And BioBuzz has been known for events for 14 years, and I know we've taken a little bit of a break, but while we're building the talent lab, but connecting people and making people sure they want to be here is a big part of that utopian community. And again, I know people come to City Garage because they want to be here, they want to see each other. So from a real estate perspective, this is kind of, a little bit of that utopian community. We've got investor on site, we've got product engineering consulting firm to outsource on site. We've got Launchboard here to help commercialize companies. We've got 16 or 20, early stage companies here. We've got an on-site recruiting company for your talent. So again, just to kind of more localize it, if we could take this and make this and blow this up across the whole ecosystem, I think that would probably check the boxes.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, you as a individual, but then also the way that you've gone about integrating kind of these segmented groups and bringing them together to really weave the fabric of what I think is needed in most, if not any, ecosystem, it's been really impactful, and we're really appreciative of everything that you do for the life science community here in Maryland and beyond. Obviously, presence in RTP and Philadelphia, And I think the goal is to expand that even further. And so here at Scheer Partners, we're just very grateful to have a relationship with you and your team. And thank you so much for joining today. And I'm sure this will be the first of many, many more conversations.
I hope so. Well, I appreciate you having me. And Scheer Partners has been such an important part of the ecosystem. The 20 years that I've been in it, Scheer Partners has always been part of it as well. And we really appreciate the partnership. So enjoy the conversation. Hope we can do it again.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. Today, you heard some amazing insights from Chris Frew on the important trends impacting workforce development in the life science sector. Tune in next time for BioBuzz.